Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and I hope you all are having a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining this conversation. My name is Eric Rain. I'm the board chair for Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and we are about to get into, I think, is going to be a conversation. This is the fourth conversation that we're having on this topic, and tonight we're going to be talking about cannabis legalization in New York. And specifically, we have come into the cities of Rochester and Buffalo, New York. So if you guys are in those areas or you know somebody in those areas, go ahead and share this Facebook Live. Tap somebody in and make sure that they are paying attention and watching. Tell them to go to the InfraMM Facebook page. But we are going to have such a great conversation tonight. And this conversation, again, this is the series of conversations that we've been having throughout the state of New York about cannabis legalization. And we could not do that without our sponsors, without support of none other than GTI, Green Thumb Industries, which is a current provider there in the state of New York. And they have been a part of making sure that this cannabis legalization is furthering in New York, that they are engaging in conversations around the state. And so we thank them, and we are going to hear a quick intro and welcome from Sarah, who is a representative from GTI. And she's going to tell us a little bit about GTI and who they are and what they do in the state. So hi, Sarah. Thank you, and welcome to the conversation.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for the introduction. Like Eric said, my name is Sarah. I have been, I'm the dispensary manager at FP Wellness. I've been a pharmacist for a little over 8 years, and I've been with FP Wellness since we opened our doors in January of 2019. FP Wellness, like Eric said, is a medical marijuana company owned by GTI, Green Thumb Industries, which is a national cannabis retailer. Here at FP Wellness, we believe that everyone has the right to well-being through the power of cannabis. We also realize that not everyone has the same level of cannabis knowledge, so we employ highly trained pharmacists and patient care specialists to ensure that each interaction and treatment plan is specifically tailored for each patient and their individual wants and needs. We are a company where people come first. Together, we all share in the commitment of giving back to the communities in which we serve. Here in Rochester, FP Wellness has partnered with the Breast Cancer Coalition, Toys for Tots, Adding Candles for Brain Cancer Research, and Verona Street Animal Society, just to name a few. As Green Thumb Industries, FP Wellness looks into the future, we're super excited about all the possible partnerships and opportunities here in Rochester, and we look forward to bringing high-quality cannabis and care to all the patients in Rochester and all the surrounding areas.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to GTI and FP Wellness. We appreciate the support. Again, it's conversations like these that are super important that we are having as the state moves forward. And so we're going to get right into it. We have such a rock star lineup of guests here, and I'm super excited to introduce them and bring them up on stage. Let you guys get to meet them and let us get into this conversation. So thank you again, Sarah. And we're going to go ahead and bring up our first person, none other than the chapter president for Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Dr. Adrian Adams. Dr. Adams, thank you for being with us today. You're muted.
Okay, sorry. Yes, I'm glad to be here. Glad everybody's joining us. We really do need to have some conversations to get on the same page moving forward, because we are early in the process still. But in cannabis, the time is a day is like a week is like a month is like a year. Things are moving so fast that we really need to get ahead of things, ahead of the rules and regulations that are coming, and have the hard conversations now. I'm Dr. Adrian Adams. I am the CEO of Ontogen Botanicals CBD, as well as the New York chapter president of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. And I would welcome working with any of you to move the ball forward and keep progressing towards a greater state of cannabis in New York State.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Adams. And of course, Another rock star we're bringing to the table is Leah Hamilton-Pope, who is the senior, I'm sorry, Halton-Pope, I apologize, senior analyst for New York Assemblywoman Chris People-Stokes. So thank you for being here with us today, Lee. We appreciate you, for being here. You have a quick intro you want to give to words?
Sure. Thank you so much, Eric. My name is Leah Halton-Pope. I'm Senior Advisor to New York State Assembly Majority Leader Crystal People-Stokes. I and a good number of people in the Assembly, the Senate, and the Governor's office wrote the legislation that legalized marijuana for adult use in the state of New York and expanded the medical program. We worked on this for the last 8 years, pretty much my entire time working with the Majority Leader, and I'm happy to be here and look forward to discussing everything with you.
Absolutely. The entire state owes a gratitude to and her entire team. You guys have really been moving the needle forward on this and really being a voice for the people. So we appreciate you and hats off to you. Thank you for being here with us. Next up is somebody who also needs no introduction. Wanda James is, someone that has traversing the state. We know that she's doing such an amazing job in Colorado and helping to really get more Black and brown people into this industry through advocacy and just education. So thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you to Minorities for Medical Marijuana for having me on here today. I have been licensed now in the cannabis space selling weed for 11 years. We were the first African Americans legally licensed in America to have a dispensary, edible company, and a cultivation facility here in Colorado. My goodness, I think we've worked with just about every municipality that has gone legal to help them traverse what this legalization is going to look like. And we're massively excited for New York, just as we were for, California and Illinois. New York seems to be doing and learning from the different steps. So hopefully we are minimizing the potholes, no pun intended, or maybe there was a little pun intended, but it seems like New York is really standing up for social equity, which all of us know has failed miserably across the United States.
I could not agree more. We're going to get into some of that today because New York says social equity day one, and that is such an important part of this conversation. We're definitely going to get into that. My next guest, Bill Hughes, has been a regular on some of our podcasts. You guys know him, a resident of New York, so long doing so much great work on the ground. Bill, thanks for joining us again tonight, brother. Good to see your face.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Eric. And I would like certainly thank M for MM and the work that they have done, and all the panelists for all the work that you guys have done to get us to this point. I'm a former city councilman in the city of Hudson, New York, and then I served 10 years on the county legislature, and most of that time has been around social justice and social equity issues. And so I was looking to transfer those skills over into the cannabis industry as an entrepreneur. And I'm absolutely, grateful that we're now having this conversation about upstate New York, because oftentimes when we talk about New York, we focus a lot from Westchester south. And we need to have a conversation from Dutchess north. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Not agree more. We definitely want to highlight, how this impacts, in, like you said, New York, Rochester, Buffalo, and we have someone from the mayor's office, and I'm not sure if it's mayor or not, because of the name we're getting, but we're going to the stage and see what we get. All right. Okay, I see Sean. Sean, are you there, or perhaps is the mayor on? Okay, we may come back. I'm not sure if there's some technical difficulties, but we may come back. All right, so keeping it moving, guys. We're having such. New York is. I'm down here in Florida. I'm in Florida. We're in for him headquartered. And I tell you, so much conversation down here in Florida about what is going on in New York and everybody paying attention to what's going on in New York. And so this is such a key conversation because I think everybody understands that this market itself is going to be an important cannabis market, right? So, but before we can talk about, the future, when we were talking tonight about the past, present, future, I want to talk a little bit about the past of cannabis in New York. And Bill, I'll come to you first, being that, New Yorker. Talk about what it was like when if you could share a little story or something about when you were, younger. What was it like to growing up in the state of New York dealing with this plant?
Cannabis, along with a lot of the other, which are much more serious illicit drugs, really affected all of New York, and a great deal, specifically the Black and brown community. I mean, if you look into some of the communities upstate, for example, say Albany, Hudson, areas that people generally don't look at, in the Catskill areas, you see where a large portion of the Black male population has spent some length of time incarcerated, whether it was due to cannabis or some other drug. But most of the time it was for cannabis possession. When I was in high school, we had this like rolling fear, like where the young men would be scared of the police and interacting with the police, oftentimes because they may have had a joint in their pocket. I myself was not one that really partaked in my youth, but quite a few of our kids did. And you knew it was going to scar you for life. But not only with police departments, it spilled over into our churches and into the Black community, and to the point to where it became such a hated drug in the community. Now that we're trying to legalize it, it's very tough to penetrate the Black church because of the past history.
Absolutely. Leah, I know you guys working on this for so long. You had that in mind. You had, the harms that the war on drugs and what it meant and how it devastated communities there in New York. And, can you talk about, even from your standpoint, what it was like, in the past when it comes to this, and even how the government from, policy wise, or even, with law enforcement as well?
So, as I stated earlier, we ended 90 years of prohibition in New York State on March the 30th. And by the 31st, it became law. From stop and frisk laws that negatively impacted our communities. We had Black and brown people going to prisons, to the prison industrial complex, which pretty much our bodies helped build. Families were destroyed. There is not one part of the state of New York that you cannot tell those communities that have been affected. You have families that were completely separated, children being raised by grandparents, aunts, uncles, others who were not there. Then once, because it was a small amount of marijuana, they did time, they learned how to become criminals. And then you had a higher recidivism rate in the state of New York, and quite frankly, throughout the entire country. So the impact of this plant that was grown from, it comes from the earth, and, the leader will tell you that God put it here. And somehow, because of racist intentions, I'm not going to mince words about why it happened. A gentleman, Anslinger, decided that this was a way to criminalize it. He demonized the plant, and mostly Black and brown people who may or may not have used it, including jazz musicians. Then you get into the Nixon era, and his own senior advisor said that they realized they couldn't come out directly against the war, and they can't say they hate Black people. So they created a policy. They've intensified the war on drugs, the so-called war on drugs, and criminalized both heroin and marijuana heavily. And the impact has been felt in our community for generations. And so it took generations to get where we are now, and it's going to take quite some time to undo 90 years of harm. For those of us who like to say it's not moving fast enough, it didn't happen overnight, and it's going to take a little bit of time to restore it. And so this legislation was intentional in making sure that we put social justice issues first and equity first as a priority over revenue. And that's why we did what we did, to try to undo some of the harms. Some things you can never replace. And we also further decriminalized penalties. So I think in 2017, the leader passed a bill that created a sealing the record. And then we increased it again in 2019, and we expunged records for 1 ounce. And this current legislation now does 3 ounces with an automatic expungement, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later.
Absolutely. And you gave such a great historical context. And I think the other part of it, that I like to remind people is that, we got to talk about and this conversation is about the impact of cannabis legalization, but we can't have that conversation without talking about the impact of prohibition. And we still have a lot to unpack when it comes to that. And how we, now move forward in the industry that is legal. And so, Wanda, I can come to you on this question. Being in the first market in the country to go legal, talk about how delicate that is in terms of recognizing that communities have literally been destroyed because of this and the way that it was policed, and to now people are able to set up shop and become millionaires, because of it. And so, can you talk about what that's like, and maybe some words of advice as New York moves forward through this process?
So let's, thank you, Lee, for that historical piece to it. And it's amazing when you look at just about every Black person that's been murdered by the police in the last, I'm going to say, let's go modern history, the last 5 years. The first thing that the cops release on them is their cannabis use. Trayvon Martin was kicked out of school because he had an empty backpack. An empty bag in his backpack that smelled like marijuana. If that kid was in school, he'd be alive today. He'd be 22 years old. When Botham John was sitting in his living room watching TV, eating ice cream and smoking a bowl, a drunk cop walked into his apartment and shot him in the head. And the first things that the police put out there was, there was a bong and some weed on the table next to him. Yeah, so what? Michael Brown, weed in the system. Sandra Bland, weed in her system. I mean, it's amazing that the minute a cop shoots somebody in the back, the police release they have weed in their system, as if that is some reason to demonize a human being. Well, let's talk about weed in your system. Colorado sold $2 billion worth of weed last year, legal weed. $2 billion for a society that has 5 million people in it. Y'all got 5 million people in one block in Brooklyn. So when you start to talk about, that $5 billion, that wasn't just sold to people in Colorado. I own a dispensary. People from Kansas, Texas, Miami, New York, everywhere come here for the very first time to buy legal weed because people, and here was the interesting psychological effect of legalizing, people want to do legal things. It was, funny to me to watch an older couple from Kansas come into the dispensary, 60, 70 years old. And the last time they smoked weed was the Bob Marley concert, in 1978, and they're walking along the store and they're seeing that, there are drinks, there is chocolate, there's mints, there's infused sex lube, there's some of whatever it is that you're looking for, as well as medicinal products, patches and different things. So whatever it is that you're looking for, we can now give you in terms of cannabis. You need to sleep, we can help you with cannabis. You got pain, we can help you with cannabis. You got some anxiety, we can help you with cannabis. Now, I can't make those health-related calls in the dispensary, but we're seeing that cannabis does all of this from what all of the patients and consumers are telling us. So here we are, 11 years later, in what we would like to consider a mature market. The stigma of cannabis here in Colorado, I'm not going to say is no more, but is no more. The ladies who lunch have cannabis and have vape pens. The men who play soccer have cannabis and vape pens. The moms have cannabis. The daughters have cannabis. The college students have cannabis. The worker at 7-Eleven has cannabis. There is no group that does not enjoy cannabis. So at this point, it is ridiculous to me that we are still dealing with a legislative system and a president that does not understand that the harm, quote unquote, done by this plant is slim to none, a lot less than Red Bull or cigarettes or beer. And then we start to see the great harm that prohibition has done. America just lost one of its greatest Olympians because she smoked a joint. I'm floored by that. And the rules are the rule, people. Oh, the rules are the rules. Well, slavery was the rule. Women not voting was the rule. Black people not voting was the rule. So the rules suck. And it's time that we start to change, where we're at right now, with what is happening. Because what we have here in Colorado is amazing. 48,000 people in Colorado are badged, which means they go to work every day in the cannabis industry. $2 billion, $10 billion of sales in the last 5 years, $1 billion in tax revenue. Teen use has been statistically the same. It has not changed because no 14-year-old wants to smoke what grandma's smoking, So, it's amazing what we see here. Clean cannabis, no mold, no menu, no bugs. It's just time that we get over the reefer madness that has been sold to us for so long.
And that's such a great segue, I think, to bring Dr. Adams, because, when we talk about this, right, we need to change rules, right? One of the things I loved about New York, coming from outside the state, the first time I was invited to come speak about cannabis in the state of New York, I heard the first time a state say social equity day one. And it was just like, oh, that concept alone was just such a powerful thing. Again, in the state where I live in Florida, it was a non-starter, right? And you guys were like, listen, we're not starting this conversation unless we're doing, social. And so talking about the rule, talking about the legislation that is in place, Dr. Adams, can you tell us a little bit more about the MRT? Because I know, all of us on here, we've been well versed on it. We've probably read it a few times now, but most of our audience may not be familiar. So can you give us a rundown on that?
Yeah, so the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act actually, it's a game changer in many ways because it pretty much lowers the temperature on the laws and the penalties and sentencing that surround cannabis. It just, the amounts have dropped down. What used to be a felony is now a misdemeanor. What was a misdemeanor amount is now a violation. So it gets to the point where now you can actually change the records of people. You can expunge crimes that today it wouldn't be a crime. Then it was. So you can get rid of those, and doing it automatically, is an amazing step. But what's really important, though, is that we continue to talk about this and view it because, and I heard an interesting term from Dashida Dawson, gotta love her, cannabigotry. Like that one. That was my word of the day today, where we basically take people who have these criminal backgrounds, particularly involving cannabis, and exclude them from things. There's over 100, certificate programs in New York that it is automatic exclusion if you have any prior conviction. Just look at the last, the PPP loans from this past year. If you had prior convictions, even though maybe you owned a restaurant, whatever, it has nothing to do with it. That conviction basically meant you didn't get any help. So we really need to do a better job of making sure that we don't make that a hurdle that can't be cleared. And I think murder is a great start, we're on the way. There's more work to be done in the next legislative session. And I look forward to seeing what Leah and the Assemblywoman can actually do to further this along.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk some more about the future, but I want to stay here in the present. How does this, legalization in cannabis in New York change the medical program? How does it impact the medical program? And what can be done so that it doesn't end up cannibalizing the medical program? And I'll kind of let that go, Robin, and everybody, take a stab at that and kind of share some thoughts on that. Leah, we'll start with you. Yeah.
Okay. So we've maintained the medical program, which was started 7 years ago here in the state of New York. What's different is we've created a brand new agency, the Office of Cannabis Management, which will have a 5-member control board. This has not been done in the state of New York at all, where there's any legislative input. A 5-member control board, 1 appointment by the Senate, 1 appointment by the Assembly, our House, and then 3 by the governor, which includes the chair of the board. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. And then we have those 13 members of an advisory board to make sure that there's social equity. The medical program itself will, those medical businesses or registered organizations, we call them ROs, they'll be able to enter into the adult use market with some limitations. We didn't want to allow, because we came from the perspective of equity first, we made sure that if those ROs wanted to get into the market and stay vertically integrated, they would pay to do so. Those funds would take care of our social equity applicants. They would be able to not only stay vertical, but they would also be able to sell wholesale to our equity applicants, because we learned from other states, those equity dispensaries, some of them didn't have product very quickly. And so this was a fail-safe that we put on there. In addition to that, we put a 2-year look back to make sure that nobody is growing bigger than the other, so that the equity is still in place, but the medical program is still taken care of as well. We've allowed for physicians to expand which ailments would be able to be served through medical cannabis. And we allow for home grow, which will start, it's supposed to be 6 months after March 31st. So it'll be in September, where those who have a medical card can home grow. And we've allowed for whole flower. So we preserved and added to the medical program. We also changed the language because we took medical and hemp from Ags and Market for hemp and medical from DOH and moved into this brand new office. We changed the language to say that the office you can create more, as opposed to if maybe possibly may, allowing for more medical licenses to be available, which of course, if they want to get into the adult use market, would also provide more resources for social equity applicants.
And we have a question here about when is flower coming? I don't know. Are there a timeline into that?
So for the 14 states that went before New York, including Canada, it took about 18 months to 2 years for regulations and everything to get set up. The way the law is set now, DOH, because Office of Cannabis Management is not fully up and running yet, DOH can change the regulations right now and allow for flower, but it will definitely happen through the Office of Cannabis Management. If they don't do it sooner, then the new office will take care of that. But it will be available in dispensaries, that and for hemp flower, which is important to notice. I'm sorry, I think Bill was saying something.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Am I on mute? Oh, I'm off. So what I was going to say is, if not for the updated bill, if we were to legalize through recreational, it was going to damage the medical, no doubt about it. I think 2 big components: one, allowing the home grow, and also allowing smokable flower will allow the medical program to really grow and prosper along with a vibrant, what I believe is going to be a very vibrant adult use program.
Bill, if I may, real quickly,
Go ahead.
the medical, we were very intentional to not let one happen before the other. ROs were chomping at the bit to expand, to do whatever. And so we allowed them to expand their current footprint with some caveats, right? For their dispensaries to be co-located, they could do numbers 5 and 6 can be co-located in communities that have been underserved. And number 7 has to go, they can put that wherever they like. But we put some fail-safes to make sure our community is still served. So both the rural and people of color have access to the medical program, and MRTA actually expands that.
So can I, if I could ask a question, because I get this all the time, what determines an underserved community?
I think I could say the communities that look like those that are represented by M4MM.
Okay.
And those that are in rural communities, right? You don't have access.
Yeah.
And it's not just the city and urban communities. It's also communities that may not have internet. You can tell what those communities look like as well. They don't have access to it.
Many times there are cities that perform some form of study to if they feel as though there's some type of disadvantage in that community. There are studies that are done sometimes that. And so there are some technical definitions to that. I could give one here because I know it varies so widely. So, but yeah, I mean, a lot of those cases will have of who meets those particular guidelines. We're getting a lot of questions, and Leah, I feel like this is enough for you, but I'm not sure. Questions about appointments. Obviously, board set up, and everybody wants to know. I know that. The real answer is, guys, it takes time. Like it really, these processes don't happen overnight, and so on. But go ahead, we have some better information to share.
Well, I don't know how much better it's going to be. There are some names that have been floating around. There are some appointments that have to happen, right? The chair of the board, the executive director, those have to be appointed by the Senate. And the governor needs to send those names. There have been some, I don't know if maybe you've heard a few things. There have been some controversial conversations about who may or may not be in those positions. I'm hearing that, it's very possible that the governor is going to put it down in the near future. Session is at the call of the speaker and the Senate Majority Leader. So when they call them in, they can come at any time. To vote, and they don't all have to be there. So I do hear that those discussions are ongoing, and this is as of maybe a couple hours ago.
So,
for those of you around the country, this is what makes New York a little more difficult. You never really know what exactly what all is going on around in Albany.
Well, 1 + 1 never equals 2 in government, especially here in New York. It's usually like some number that hasn't been created yet. But I do know for a fact that they are working very intensely about it and trying to be intentional about who those individuals are. Because it's not enough to have a control board. It's about who those people are. These are making the regulations. And if you're not as intentional as we were about the legislation about who's on that board, then we're doing a disservice to the entire state of New York. And then therefore, where we were a leader in doing things right, we will fall behind. So I'm not upset about taking our time and getting it right, because if you don't have the right person as a face of this new agency, which handles adult use, medical, and hemp, we're in trouble. So
and let me give you guys just an example of how getting it wrong can mess up things. When you don't get it right at the legislative standpoint, or even at the rulemaking standpoint and the point, you can end up in a situation like Florida, to where licenses were supposed to be awarded by statute in 2017 and in 2021, now talking about that potentially happening by the end of the year. These things absolutely take time, and no amount of speed applied to this is going to justify and rectify those who have been arrested, those people who come from those communities and family members who have, been incarcerated for this. I get it. Trust me, I get it. Y'all want this now. You deserve it now. But you also deserve it to be done the right way. And I think New York in particular is such, like Dr. Adams said, such a difficult thing to really traverse in that regard. But you guys have so many communities that stand to benefit. And if it's not done right, those communities won't benefit. And so I do think it is, it's not a move at the pace that most people want it, but I think once it's done, hopefully you guys will be in a great place. And it's great that we're having conversations like this. And again, thanks to our sponsors, GTI, for seeing the value in us having these conversations early on, so that again, hopefully, legislators and the folks who are writing rules and commissions and so on are listening, and they're paying attention to what you want from the community and can find ways to integrate that. So, I think that's super important. Dr. Adams, it looks like you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to applaud the people who are here, who are listening, especially all my New Yorkers out there. It's so important that you pay attention right now, and that you speak up, and that you join various groups, whether it's Minorities for Medical Marijuana and Minority Cannabis Business Association. There's a whole host of different groups you can join and get pieces of information. It's very hard because things are coming out piecemeal, and everybody gets a little bit of this, that, and the other from here and there. We all share stuff all the time behind the scenes, but this is one thing where it's true in general, but especially in New York. Once the rules and regulations and legislation is set in place, changing it after the fact is nearly impossible. So it is crucial that we actually stay in the game, keep your head in the game, and make your voice heard with your local elected officials.
Yeah, and that's why this part in the process is so important. And I often tell people, I say, you have those states tried their best, but here in New York, we have CPS, which is Crystal People Stones. And the reason why I say that is when you look at the process of, we were going through it before, and I'm someone who's looking to be an entrepreneur in New York State myself, but I'm not in a hurry. Just like she wasn't in a hurry when the bill didn't get passed the last time around, it wasn't properly going to serve those who were looking for social justice and equity, and she strongly fought for that, and this time around we're getting it. But if we miss it in the rules and regulations, all that was fought for will be for naught. Although we all want to get to work, please don't rush it, because if you do, you may ultimately find yourself on the outside.
Yeah, and let's talk, given the trajectory of social justice, social equity, and what that program may look like. Do we have any inclination of some of the things that we can expect? And I ask this because I want us to shift a little bit into some of the conversation about what businesses can be doing to get ready, because I know that's really what's at the top of everybody. Know what's happening up there in Albany, so that they can figure out how to position themselves, right? So, let's talk about from a social equity standpoint. It was mentioned earlier, so many people in New York are going to fit into that box, right? It probably, I can't say I know of another state, and you can correct me on this, that potentially would have as many social equity applicants. I mean, we saw in Chicago how crazy it was. I'm sorry, in Illinois, how crazy it was. I think New York is going to be very, very. So what can we expect from the social equity standpoint in New York?
So every time I get on these panels, I get tagged like the dream killer, because I just start like killing people's dreams all over the place. And I don't want to be that. I just want to make sure everybody is prepared. So what you all think is not what it is. All right, let me be very clear on that. Cannabis entrepreneurism is not what people think. Having one small dispensary will not give you generational wealth, not unless you happen to own a mega dispensary like Planet 13 in Las Vegas, or you happen to be, on Fifth Avenue or the corner of whatever. I mean, there's a few, but for the most part, owning one dispensary will not give you generational wealth. And then let me also explain that I know all of you know about 280E. 280E is a tax penalty in which every cannabis business in the United States operates under. I've spoke to people in LA before California legalized, and they're all, well, California, we don't have to do all that. And I'm like, yeah, you do. So 280E is a tax penalty that was created for Pablo Escobar and his friends. Basically, anybody that is selling the Schedule I illegal drug owes the government between 40 to 80% of their income. Income means if I made $100 today and I paid $50 to employee salaries, another $25 to lights and everything else, I kept $25. If this was a regular business, the government would tax me on that $25 that my business kept. Under cannabis, the federal government taxes me at the $100. Even though that they know that I paid out $50 to my employees and $25 to electricity and everything else, I'm still taxed on the $100 that I brought in. So effectively, if my dispensary brings in $5 million, I have a tax bill for the federal government at the end of the year for 40 to 60% of $5 million. Now, there are some write-offs, but they're tiny and really not worth talking about. So every year, and that's your profit. So let's understand and the reason this was set up for drugs and why this, or for drug dealers, and why this number is that way is because it takes your profit. So the government was saying, Pablo Escobar, here's what we're going to do. You're now busted, you're in jail, and we want 80% of everything that you made last year, right? To take away Pablo Escobar's profit. So every cannabis business in the United States is taxed under that, right? So I need everybody not to think that this is going to be, money day one, because it is not. Now, if we get to the point where legalization, and the only way to stop 280E is take it off of the schedule and federally legalize. That's it. No other conversations. New York can't do anything to stop it. Colorado can't do anything to stop it. It's what it is, right? So there's that. On top of it, if this is the first business that you are running, I highly suggest that you pull together a team that understands business. And I'm not taking anything away from anybody out there in passion and know-how and hustle, but this is a damn hard business to run. Colorado, we had 99 rule changes February 1st. 99, of which I have to know everything about, because the inspectors come through and they start hitting my dispensary, or if you're not on the rules, with penalties. Penalties aren't $10 or $15. Penalties are $150,000, $50,000. Walking behind your counter without your badge on is a $25,000 penalty. So understand that the money that you think you're going to make, you are not. You're not. You're just not. So there's that aspect. Running this business, y'all, I don't care if you've been selling weed off the back of your car for 100 years. Now you got to know HR. Now you got to know ADL, because you can't have a bathroom in your dispensary if it's not ADL. You got to know how to hire. You got to know how to fire. You got to have an accountant, a CPA, and a bookkeeper, right? And you're paying, you got to have a lawyer. You got to have a criminal lawyer. You got to have a business lawyer. You got to have a cannabis lawyer. All three of them. You have to have them. And if you're smart and if you have any extra money, you need a lobbyist. The reason why you need a lobbyist is because Colorado had 99 rule changes on February 1st. I'm running a business. I don't know what's going on at the Capitol. My lobbyist makes sure that I know that. Now, by the time I pay all those people, there's very little money left for me and my husband who own the business. Very, 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 very little. So understand that. Do not go into this thinking that, me and mom are going to get together and we're going to have a little shop on the corner and we're going to sell bundt cakes. It does not work that way. On top of that, if you're a cultivator, every strain that you have, you're going to have to pay somebody to test every time you take down a strain or a batch. So understand too, and I think for Black folks, the one thing that we're not involved in, or Black and brown folks, is lab and testing. If I had to do it all over again, I would not be a dispensary owner. I would be a lab. I swear to you. I swear to you. I swear to you.
We have to pause right there on that, because I think you are hitting on something that is, if there's any message that I, from an outside state, someone who is board chair of one of the largest minority organizations across the country, I hope that folks are hearing what she just said. You know, there is such a capital intensive, you know, play on getting to, you know, being a dispensary or a grower, and aspects of the business as well. But one of the things that we have not done as a community, as a whole, is looked at this entire industry as an industry, and not just as, you know, growing weed and selling weed like that. It is so much bigger than that, you know, so much bigger than that. So, you know, I even want to highlight a program for has a program where we're trying to connect minority businesses with cannabis operators because they need janitorial services, they need lawn maintenance, they need to purchase, you know, supplies and products. And these are opportunities. Listen in, hear us clearly, New Yorkers. Okay, if you want to get to this industry, there are many, many avenues besides just the growing and the dispensing. And those things are probably already in your wheelhouse with a business you're already running. And so I see both Bill and Dr. Adams jumped up. And everybody wanted, so I'll open it up, let people, you know.
Let me just say one other quick thing though too about running a business. This is probably my 11th or 12th business. I came up as a military officer. I've worked for 4 Fortune 100 companies. I've been an executive for most of my life. My husband and I have run 5 restaurants, consulting firms, and a whole bunch of other things, right? And I don't want to be rude here, but this business kicks my ass every single day, and I've been doing it for 11 years. I just have to let everybody know this is hard. I don't have time off. I go to work every single day. This is not what you think it is.
I can actually say that as Wanda was talking about labs, I just spent a couple grand on labs today, and my eyes started to twitch as she was talking. But I really do want to emphasize what Wanda was saying, in that there are so many other areas and avenues that you can do to be a part of this industry, particularly without touching the plant. When you get into touching the plant, now you're talking about that whole 280E situation as far as accounting goes, Wanda was referring to. However, if you're in other parts of the industry where you're talking about accessories like pipes or whatever it may be, clothing,
Products, services.
Hemp foods. I know some guy who's got some company with hemp seeds, things like that.
We dabble with, you know, hemp foods.
Hemp and fork. And but there's so many other avenues, and there's traditional trades involved. If you're an electrician, there's people who are building out these cultivation sites. There's guys who are making a ton of money going around the country, putting up the lighting systems, plumbers. There's just, if you really think about it, the best piece of advice I can give anybody watching this is really look at yourself. What are your options? What can you do? Who do you have access to? If you have somebody that you know who's a family member, even distant one, whatever, who has a restaurant, well, maybe the sauces you were thinking about making could actually go. Where's your distribution outlet? If you're thinking about products, you need to know that up front. But whatever you do, think about it long and hard and see if you can apply it to cannabis, because chances are you might be able to.
And let's talk about products just 2 seconds as well, too. I've met so many people and I've destroyed their dreams. This one wonderful young woman came to me with a pie in a jar, you know, and it has like you eat down and it's got the layers of pie. It was so good, and it was infused, you know, peach stuff on the bottom. It was so good. And I told her there's not a dispensary in America that will carry it because it has no shelf life. It can't be tested. And I can't take a chance on somebody getting sick over all the nice little frosty cream that you have on there. So you need to start thinking about shelf life. Think about things that sit in a 7-Eleven. And here's the thing about owning a dispensary. And once again, I don't want to crush anybody's dreams. Yes, it seems very sexy to own a dispensary. It does. And we love it. I'm not taking anything away from it. But I run a 7-Eleven. I run a very exclusive 7-Eleven. That's what we do all day long. So understand what this is when you're on the other side of it. And the minute that you get over the fact that you got 500 pounds of weed in your hands, which is exciting the first time you see it, after that, you are running a 7-Eleven.
Yeah. And you know, on the product side, and I'll let you jump in just a sec. On the product side, people don't understand product development is extremely expensive. If your intention is to be on the shelf, legal dispensary, the cost that you are going to pay, like you said, we're doing, going back to labs, we're doing shelf life testing on our products for the very, products don't even contain, they're not infused, you know what I mean? But we still have to go through those steps, and it's not cheap. But I encourage our service providers out there, the accountants, the lawyers, you guys need to really be thinking how you are, real estate agents and so on. How can you serve this industry? Because that's where the real opportunities, I think, lie for folks, not just in the ability to have a dispensary or a grow, but to be able to have multiple contracts with multiple, companies at different levels and providing services, because this industry needs it. But Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you had Wanda today, because she is laying it out, and I think people really, people need to hear this, because so many people are coming up to me, because I talk about it a lot, and I've been working on it for the last 2 years, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna open a dispensary, or I'm gonna do a cultivation. I'm like, listen, I thought the same thing 2 years ago. You need a full team around you, and if you don't have your team already looking at New York, I'm gonna tell you, you're really behind. Not that you can't do it, but you are really behind. And when I say a team, look, like me, I'm good at legislation. There are a lot of things I understand. I cannot create the oil by myself. So I went out and I convened a whole team. We have a team of 5 people now. You're gonna need a team behind you. You will not make it in this industry without a team. And they need to be playing different areas. Someone is good in finance, someone is good in law, someone understands the cannabis business. You need a good team, and I can't say that strong enough. And if you don't have it, and this is the thing I was stressing to the people in the state as well, when we start looking at giving out social equity license, we need to make sure, and thank God to Crystal Peoples-Stokes and our other leaders, that we give them some real foundation before we give them a license. Otherwise, they're going to be just taken advantage of by predatory people out there.
And I also want to bring up too, for folks that are doing cultivating as well too. Legal cultivating is very different than the legacy market cultivating. Since everything has to be tested, we have to be mold, mildew, no pesticides. I mean, there's even certain pesticides that are fine for food that we won't let you use in cannabis. All of that, and if you use the wrong pesticide, you will throw away $300,000 worth of weed once the state says get rid of it. But the other thing that blew me away is we have a cultivation facility, just brought on actually 3 years ago, brought on a whole new system. We have something called the Digitron. Y'all, this whole thing is completely computerized. It computerizes all the food, all of the watering of the plants. And I was a computer science major in college. And I look at this thing and I'm like, thank God there are people under here that understand what the hell this thing is, because I can't even turn it on. I mean, this is the level now of professionalism that this industry has gone through. This ain't a bunch of plants in a warehouse. I mean, everything in my warehouse, the bottom of the plants has a certain temperature and humidity. The medium of the plants has a certain temperature and humidity. The top of the plants has a certain temperature and humidity. I mean, this is so professional now. It's a whole different thing than you could possibly imagine as you all come into the legal world. The legal world is very different than the legacy market.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about, again, as we get into the legal side of things, right? And we're in Rochester, Buffalo, and I want to talk about the implications for those communities directly and other communities as well. Because, Bill, I know you have seen this already. Certain municipalities and are already talking about opting out, or will be going now. Can you talk about that? And I know sometimes it's seen as a bad thing when they decide to go that route, but I know sometimes it's a strategy of giving themselves more time to understand the label and what is going to be coming down the pipe, and being able to move forward that way. So, Bill,
Yeah. So, in New York, as I've been traveling along, obviously the 2 counties that everybody always talk about is Nassau and the 2 Long Island counties, Suffolk and Nassau. But when you come upstate, it really is a conversation. When I say upstate, I'm meaning from Dutchess County north. When you start looking at those counties, a lot of those leaders are really having deep conversations right now of whether they would want to be in the cannabis industry or not. And prior to this last bill passing, a lot of them had already came out. They were working with Sam. Was it Smart? I forgot what the acronym stands for. But they were all, a lot of the upstate counties were all looking to opt out. Since then, though, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, a lot of them were looking at the revenue, and through NISAC, which is the New York State Association of Counties, wrote a letter to the legislature saying that hey, hurry up and pass the bill because we want the revenue. So there's now you have mixed reviews where the people want it, and some of the legislators only want it because of the revenue. And then when you look at the way they approach the bill from the social equity point, some of those communities now wanted it from the revenue perspective are giving it a second thought because they're not really big on social equity.
If I may just address that. Yeah. So because we came, as you said, Bill, from the beginning, from a social equity perspective, though they said they wanted to opt out, there was never an option for counties to opt out. We were intentional by making it about cities, towns, and villages. So local municipalities being able to opt out. And if they do, they have to do so by December the 31st. However, and this is really important for all of us in upstate and downstate for that matter, voters in any of these municipalities by 10% can do a petition and request that this be put onto a ballot. It's called a permissive referendum to allow marijuana. And they can only opt out. Let me be clear what they can opt out of: dispensaries and social consumption sites. They can't stop a grower. They can't stop delivery. They can't stop any of the other licenses from operating in that city, town, or village. However, they, like you said, will not be able to access it. And just to correct something about what NISAC actually sent, they definitely wanted the revenue, but they didn't like the structure because 3% of it actually goes to the cities, towns, and villages.
Yes,
and only 1% goes to that county. And so not having that excess tax come in is crazy. I will acknowledge that, every piece of legislation has some type of unintended consequence. And so we know that there's going to be some cleanup bills that have to come out to fix some small things. But as it relates to this particular issue, we try to be as intentional as possible, especially for those who sent up a resolution from their counties since 2019 saying that they are not going to allow marijuana for adult use in their county.
And I think just one point.
I want you to follow up on this because this question is for you as well.
Okay.
Earlier point in regards to how someone to opt in because of the money, right? They want the money, and when we talk about social equity applicants and needing to, go into these municipalities and literally get their approval. How does that play out when cities are making certain requests? Are there or applicants period in general? But I guess my question is, are there going to be any protections for those social equity applicants when going to those cities so that they're not also to the shortfall budgets and so on?
So I'm going to be honest with you. You know that we can write all kinds of legislation, but you cannot legislate morality, and you can't legislate people out of racism, period, right? So we do know that people are going to still attack and do whatever they can. The regulations will be in place and will further codify some of the things that are already in the law that prevent, but I can't stop what an officer may do as you get a delivery that comes into that city, town, and village, except for the fact that what the law says, you can't stop me because you smell smoke. You can't stop me for certain things. And the penalties are much lower than what they once were. But there still are some things that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And I'm sure that once this market is up and running, we're going to find out that there are some things that we're going to have to go back, fix the law, and make adjustments as necessary. Just because that's the nature of people. And if you want to be a jerk, you're going to find a way to do that. And there's nothing that we can do legally that can stop it, except make it harder as much as possible for those individuals who are bad actors to continue being bad actors in those cities, towns, and villages.
And that's
On that note, just let me say real quick, on that note, we just have to remember the power that we had, that we've shown in the last election. Look at the results that it's had. It scared the hell out of a lot of people to the point where draconian laws are being instituted across the country. We need to flex our muscle at the ballot box. That's how I got in the ear of somebody on Long Island who was very negative, and when I presented it as, you have in your district, you have these two locales that are heavily minority. And guess what? We vote now. It's a different conversation. And even in the last year, we can have a different conversation than we used to have. I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead.
I'm going to say, so what Eric was talking about and what Ms. Holton was talking about, I was chair. So the governor issued an order to have municipalities do reform, a police reform panel. And so every county in the state went through that exercise. Me looking at the cannabis industry and anticipating this, I was actually one of the chairs in Columbia County of that panel. So I kind of forced that conversation into the panel conversation when we were looking at police reform, because I knew it was going to come to this kind of cross. Now, whether the other communities did that as well, I'm not sure. But having, like what Dr. Adams said, with the people having, power and exercising that vote is going to be very important. And the other point I want to go back to is that permissive resolution. That too is very important, because that then puts the power back in the hands of the people. You may have some legislators who will come together and they don't reflect the view of the population. They just say, you know what, we don't want it, and we're gonna ban it. But 60% of the population in their community actually want it. And they now have the opportunity, because of the legislators, to put that permissive referendum on the ballot and uphold and vote it in.
That is such an important tool. Such an important tool. We see it in states around the country. Florida, our medical marijuana program was expanded to a ballot referendum state level, but having that kind of power at your local level is extremely important for you guys to be able to, move the needle in your own local communities. But I think what's key and important in this conversation that we're having right now is the importance of being involved, right? I think over the last couple of years, we have seen an increase in involvement from minority communities and younger communities in politics, and certainly around this conversation around cannabis as well. And I remind you, it's still just the start. We still have a long way to go, and that, as was said before, if we don't get it right at the beginning, it's going to be so much more difficult to try to correct things. But work and to correct it is still going to need to be done. You understand? And so, Wanda, can you speak to that from your standpoint? You are 11 years in the state of Colorado. What would you, tell people here in the state of New York about the need to stay diligent, the need to stay active around this particular topic?
There's, you have to. There's no other way to do this. And as, Lee pointed out, 11 years into this, and I don't think that we have had a year without major changes to cannabis law, cannabis policy. Every year, like I said, there was 99 at the beginning of this year. And you have to be involved. I can't tell you how many different work groups I am in. You think of something as simple as packaging, right? And so there was a point when Colorado adopted packaging laws. So every piece of candy, every piece of everything has to have the THC symbol on it, right? You think no big deal. Well, if you happen to make gummies, how are you going to put a THC symbol on a gummy? So that means that you have to go out now and you have to buy specialized molds that at the bottom of the mold have the THC symbol. No big deal, right? Well, no big deal, except for each one of those molds, which is about, 2 foot by 2 foot, it's going to cost you about $150 each. And if you're doing, 70,000 gummies every couple of days, how many things is that? So basically you got $200,000 worth of molds that you need to go buy now with the THC symbol on them. Every time the state changes its mind and decided, first off, it started off with just the THC symbol, and then they wanted it red with a little thing around it. Everybody that bought packaging that had the green THC symbol on it now had to throw all that packaging away and reorder more packaging, which depending on how big your company is or your packaging needs are, that could have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you need to stay diligently involved, even if you have a license, because the licensees are going to change. The things that you have to know for those licenses are going to change. And the only way to do that is by staying involved, the work groups, the different things that are going to happen, the unforeseen consequences. One of the things that happened in Colorado just off the top was we protected everybody over the age of 21 that was caught with an ounce of cannabis. That's fine. That's legal. But what if you're under the age of 21 and got caught with an ounce of cannabis? You know what? Here's the killer. In 2014, well, when we went legal, the arrest rate for white kids dropped, and I'm not gonna remember these exact numbers, but it dropped by like 56% under the age of 21, right? The arrest for Black kids went up 72%. The arrest for brown kids went up 68%. So what happened was the school SROs, school resource officers, now when they saw weed, had to arrest these kids. So what we ended up doing in Colorado for a number of years to end the street to prison pipeline, we just increased the school to prison pipeline, meaning that we started putting our kids in jail at a younger age because we legalized for the age of 21 and didn't think about what was going to happen to the people under 21.
Well, Wanda, I just want to clarify, New York State, we did address that. And so our laws are different than Colorado. We try to learn from those who've gone before us. And for under 21, I think the most that you can get fined is $50, and it's a civil infraction, just to try to keep things. And to be honest, even the South, but there are some changes that still have to be made to the law. Which is what happened. But you're right. We were intentional. You know, when you mentioned about, I can't stress enough how important compliance is. Yeah. In New York State, we have a state register. It's offered by the Department of State. I recommend every New Yorker sign up for it. Every single Wednesday, every regulation that comes out in the state regarding whatever the industry is, they show up every Wednesday. I've been working in government for years, had no idea, so I took a little break and came back to it. In that time period, I recommend signing up for it because any new regs are going to show up there every week. You just need to find it under your Office of Cannabis Management. So right under wherever the department is where it will be once that's set. And then they'll tell you that there are comment periods. Things like that we as people need to pay attention to because these are resources that are available and we aren't aware of it. And I also like to piggyback on having a solid team. When we talk about equity, that includes MWBEs. So if you're not, it's not just about being African American, which you qualify for, but it can't hurt to sign up with somebody who can make sure that you're compliant. And if you're MWBE or a distressed farmer, which is a total different category than the federal government, which did disadvantage farmers. So those of you in Long Island who may have a wealthier county, a farmer who's not making any money may not access the equity applicant. Just to go back, I know it's going back, but I never got to mention it to you. This, by changing the law to distressed farmers, it captures everybody who may or may not have struggled during that time. So for those licenses, and there's 10 of them, if you were a grower and you want to be considered an equity applicant, then you could qualify in a different way than you would have if we kept the federal designation of a disadvantaged farmer, which required the county be suffering. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm
just wondering if in the last few minutes,
anybody who's can you repeat that resource that someone's asking about that in the chat?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't type it out, but it's the New York State Register. And if you just type it in, you'll see it. And if you scroll to the bottom, I believe you'll see sign up. And you can get it via PDF. If you have Westlaw, if you can connect to that, you can get to it. And you just need to read through it. It's very arduous. There's no question about it because it's every single rule change in the state of New York about anything. You'll find those there. But when the Office of Cannabis Management is set up and those rules are first put out, every time there's a change, every single week, you should see those there. In addition to checking, the office's website and other resources like our office, of course, you can reach out to us. I'm here. I'm always available.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Dr. Adams, you were going to say something real quick, and then I have a question that
Yeah, I was just wondering if a lot of the cannabis wannabes out there were tuning in when Wanda was talking about the hundreds of thousands of dollars in packaging that you needed and new molds. These are things that, you know, when you think about getting into the industry that don't immediately cross your mind. But, you know, there's 1,000 Wandas out there throwing away $200,000-$300,000 worth of stuff that they have to replace.
Yep.
There's lots of opportunities in different places.
Yep.
But one you mentioned MWBEs, Leah, and there are programs. There are many existing programs in the state like that to support minority businesses in different fields. My big concern that I'm really pushing right now is I feel like the MRTA got us to here, and the street is over here, and we have to bridge that gap. And I'm wondering if you guys are looking at using the existing programs that we have and just modifying them a bit for cannabis, because I think that would be a much faster and efficient route.
I think that's something that's available. We've been very intentional in Buffalo. We've been having these cannabis conversations, speaking just about making sure that people are prepared. We've been doing it for the last 4 years and connecting people who want to eventually come from the legacy market to the new market in a clean way as much as possible. And so we have some really great people who've been focusing on MWBE. I don't disagree with you, Dr. Adams. I believe that there's absolutely a way to bridge those gaps. And I think some individuals, like I can think of Janique Curry, who's based here in Buffalo. She's been working on making sure that Black and brown people have been certified, understand the process since day one. I think having more people who understand immediately how to get registered and how to become an MWBE is critical, and just connecting to those right individuals. And we also have a lot of attorneys locally who are focused on cannabis law and making sure that once the market is fully open, people of color have access to it. But yes, you're right. We absolutely could figure out a way how to bring the bridge closer and figure out how to get from the legacy market to the legal market in a smoother way. But I think the law itself, the majority leader was really intentional in making sure that we removed as many barriers as humanly possible, knowing that the regulation process was going to have to do the rest of it, which is why not only is that advisory board, you know, they're not the ones that are appointed, but those 13 members are going to be regional. These are people who are already in the industry in some way. And then there's a chief equity officer as well to make sure that the program itself is as equitable as it can be. And so when I say making sure you have the right people in the right seat on the right bus, this is why we're being really intentional in New York. If you don't have the right person as your chief equity officer, who's the watchdog to make sure that these licenses are being handled properly, that these social equity applicants are actually getting what they need to be successful, that they understand, you know, the regulations make sense. So when the control board puts something in place, there are some people in place that says, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to work in the legacy market. That won't translate into the legal market. You need to figure out a different way to do that. And so by having these two different boards, I think it will help mitigate some of the issues, but it's obviously not the answer to everything. So I agree. We could probably find a way to bring the two together.
Now, with those larger companies like the ROs and MSOs and things, are they going to have to actually produce policy? Because there's a lot of flowery language about what they're going to do as far as diversity and inclusion, but without actual policy, it doesn't happen.
The ROs aren't going to be making the policy. The regulations will govern what they can and cannot do in the state of New York in this new market.
And let me ask you, you know, with that, from, you know, I'll give another case example. Here in Florida, we were successful to get diversity language and include all of the license holders have to have a diversity plan, but there's no agency that has oversight over that. So
right.
Plans are there, but it's not tied to whether you get the license, but not specifically tied to keeping the license and maintaining the license. And is there some type of, format where that will be in play as well, or is that going to be more on like a local level, what local municipalities require those
Local,
processes? Mhm.
you mean as far as obtaining a license from the state?
Well, in terms of even setting up dispensaries and so on in the local municipalities.
So most well, I don't know how other cities are. I know downstate they have community boards that deal with where you can have a liquor store. In the city of Buffalo, if you wanted to do one, you can apply for your license from the state, but the community does have a say. I don't want to have this right next to my house. And there'll still be an opportunity for the community to determine, I may not want a social consumption location right next to me in the middle of my quiet neighborhood. And so they'll be able to petition, the community and talk to them just like they do on, like a bar or anything else here in Buffalo. That's what we have in place. And local municipalities, whatever they currently have, would still apply.
I find Buffalo very interesting because as I was looking at it, there's a tremendous list through the county of business resources where you have the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Buffalo Niagara Partnership with African American Enterprises. There's a lot of various groups that are already kind of talking that you could tap into. So I'm really interested to see what could be done out there.
Well, that's what I was saying. We've been working on this. This isn't a new conversation. I guess that's the joy of having the leader from Buffalo. But for the last 8 years, being very intentional about letting people know what to do and how to get themselves prepared, and then connecting them with people from other parts of the country who are already in it. Like Wanda, you already know what your experiences are. Here's how you can get in the industry using what you already know. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. If you're already in a cleaning business, then that's probably how you should translate it into this new industry, because you're necessary. If you're already a carpenter, then there's going to be a need for you in this industry. Connect to it. And as Wanda said, a dispensary can be cost prohibitive for some people. But if your family is already working in a business that can translate, then you need to be smart. If you're a graphic designer, packaging is going to be necessary, right? You need to be engaged in that. And you need to be paying attention to what the regulations are for that as well, because that impacts your business globally, though you may not think about it. Paying attention and always knowing where you are and what's the right place for me is what's really important to the majority leader. And she's been very intentional with our cannabis conversations. And we've, up until the most recent one, tried to keep them as private as possible. But with COVID, you ended up having to have a Zoom one, which means anybody can log in. Allowing people to have real conversations about how they were in the legacy market, what they may be doing now, and how to move into the legal world safely, using what they already have and or what their current business is. Security, drivers, if you, like you said, in real estate, there's opportunities everywhere. Banking, perhaps you have an opportunity to create a public bank, because the state chartered bank is how you can do banking in the United States. You don't have to go to the director.
HVAC.
Right, absolutely. So I just think you want to be smart about it. Talk to people who know what they're doing, and do your research. Don't just think that you're going to get in tomorrow and you don't have a plate, you don't have a fork, you don't have a knife. You have to come to the table with something prepared. And
don't underestimate being a middleman. There are tons of companies out there who have, I know of a nutrient company that is always looking to partner with small businesses, who may be a social person. So even if an MSO or one of the ROs are looking to have a diverse supply chain, and with an African American business, well, if that African American business is partnering with a larger, manufacturer of nutrients or of some other type of, you've created a way for yourself in this space that goes beyond you having to put in a bunch of capital and develop products and develop this and so on. You become a way for other companies outside of New York to enter the New York market, and their rep or franchise or partnership with in those areas. You guys go ahead.
You just want to
take the conversation in a slightly
I know you have to the equity application. There is another fail safe there. So social equity applicants have to maintain 51% ownership. That's the liability. That's everything is on you in order to remain a social equity applicant. So we're all for people selling and diversifying and growing. But then if you do and you lose that 51% and it drops down, then that, they have to apply for a new license. That's something that's really important to pay attention to. But that was to make sure that the equity program is still clean as much as we can.
So on the equity, is there a process in place to become a NWB? Because in New York State, usually that's reserved for current industries. And given that we're not a current industry in cannabis, is there a process for doing that?
For under cannabis, no. But for those who are in other businesses and you're not already registered, I would register. And then when it opens up, you can be able to move over. Just like we told people, if you're not already in the business, get an hemp license. It was $500. At least learn how to grow, learn a little bit about the business, and this was years ago. And then, like I said, there are plenty of people, plenty of resources out there where people can still help.
I went through the NWBE program in New York State. Didn't cost me a thing, and it actually took my business soup to nuts. I mean, they went through everything from the type of corporation you form, right through your finances, the whole 9 yards. I came out of there with a much more solid business. I went in there with a hope and a dream. I came out of there with a business plan. And it didn't involve cannabis. It just happened to be that the whole point of it was that so that you can certify you're a minority business in order to do government contracts with New York State. I pretty much knew that was probably never going to happen. New York State wasn't going to be buying my cannabis products. But I took the training. And that's probably in almost any state. There's probably some sort of program like that. But that's an example of what I was talking about before, where you can take a pre-existing program and modify it slightly, in this case, to fit.
Yeah. Adams, this will be the last question, and then we kind of, wrap up for the evening. But you mentioned a lot of these other groups that are there, like in Buffalo, who are, having internal conversations, and many times in those. I guess my question for any one of the panels is, for those organizations, in particular those who represent minority communities, business and so on, what should the conversation be? What conversation should they be having right now as we move towards legalization? I'm talking your NAACP, urban leagues, your Black chambers of commerce, entrepreneurial, platforms, and so on. What should the conversation be in those circles?
So can I take a crack at that first? Yeah. So I'm thinking from the entrepreneurial standpoint, not the legislative, because I'll leave that for Ms. Pope. When you look at social equity and you look at what Dr. Adams mentioned about the ROs, so when you start looking at them, what kind of plans are these guys going to put in place, right? When you start looking at the communities that they want to enter, but on the same token, these communities have to also be ready with ideas and plans that they are looking to have done. And that's where the NAACP and some of our Black organizations, because quite frankly, when it comes to social equity programs, I don't need anyone to teach me that, because I based my whole career on that. I could go into any community and link up with people who are on the ground and programs that people probably won't even see, right? Because you have the mom and the pop doing the program, doing school stuff for kids on the corner. That's not a registered program. But for the MSOs and other organizations that are looking to come into New York State, and they're looking to operate in certain communities that were harmed by the war on drugs, these organizations should be prepared and say, hey, we need this kind of help, this kind of program. And it doesn't necessarily always mean a large amount of money. It could be talent, volunteerism. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can contribute to these communities and help uplift them without putting money. But let's not say money shouldn't come with it, right? We're just saying there are other ways to contribute.
I would say the biggest thing that we all need to start fighting for is the ability to fund these businesses. You can give out as many licenses as you want to. But let me tell you guys something. Let me get real with you a second. Simply Pure has been trying to raise money now for about We've been hard raising for about 6 months. We've been looking for about 2 years now. I've been in this business 11 years. I run one hell of a good company, and I can't get the investment that I want. These big companies, they want to invest, but they want to invest on their terms. They want to take this, want to take that, don't do this, don't do that. Well, quite frankly, and I don't want to sound arrogant, but I know more about cannabis than most of the people who are running MSOs right now. So the raising of money is ridiculously hard. And not just hard in the sense of, yeah, people are going to want to give it to you. Some of that money is more expensive than what you'll understand. So if you are not a trained CFO, if you don't understand warrants and percentages and all the different things that come with finance, do not think that you can sit down and negotiate or even understand what it is that people are getting ready to put into your company. And the other downside that I see to social equity, and I've written a lot of these social equity bills, I 100% get the 51%, and I think that that's important. I really do. However, that 51% can be an albatross around your neck, because people that have no experience, no ability to run a business, or no ability to already have run a business, no track record, getting into this business at the first time, you're going to ask somebody to give you $2 million and 51% of the company. I got to tell you, as an investor, I wouldn't do that. My brother is a social equity applicant. We're going to be his investors. I don't have a problem with my brother having 51% because it's family. So I understand what's going on. But to walk in, Bill Gates doesn't own 51% of Microsoft. Steve Jobs doesn't own 51% of Apple. Very, 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 very few people own 51% of their company. And I understand why it's in place, because we're trying to protect people and grow ownership. And I understand that. But some places have made it difficult for social equity applicants to sell their business. They have to keep their business for so many years, or they can only sell to another social equity applicant. That in itself, I mean, to people to tell you how to run your business is a mistake, because if somebody comes up and says, you know what, I'll give you $10 billion for your license right now. As a social equity applicant, you might not be able to sell for 3 years. And quite frankly, if I got 51% of $10 billion, or I'm selling Simply Pure, you can have it. You can have the whole thing. But in a lot of cases, though, the social equity applicant has a rope around their neck and can't do it. And so that they miss out on the larger opportunities to be able to take that money, because sometimes getting the license and selling the license may give you more money than you'll ever make in 5 years.
And in New York State, we've seen that with registered organizations.
That's why she's the queen of cannabis.
She is. We've seen in New York State, under the medical program, I think initially there was one not initially, right after, one minority-owned business that sold several times over, and they're living on the residuals. So we're not trying to prevent that at all, but you can't still be considered a social equity applicant if you don't fit the equity definition. So if you want to sell your license, go for it. It just won't be an equity license. But the question regarding what you can do now, I will say that NAACP, urban leagues, et cetera, have already started the process and paying attention to, one, they're focusing on who's going to be in charge, and have been weighing in pretty heavily. They also know that the law dictates that 40% of the revenue that comes in once it's in is going to community reinvestment. That could be Mrs. Johnson's roof, or that could be an actual program that helps the community. I think starting to look at what issues need to be addressed and how those revenues can fit that. The other 40% is to education funding. That's not to supplant, that's a supplemental. That's just in addition to the current education money. We don't want to do it like New York State Lottery did, where that became it. And then 20% to drug treatment, prevention, and education. So just so we know what's already happening, I think those groups need to pay attention and start thinking ahead. This is where we need to start when the money starts coming in, how it should be spent, what communities need it the most, what's the low-hanging fruit that we can use. There are plenty of schools, community colleges, and others that are already changing their curriculum to help teach people about cannabis and cooking, understanding the plant, dealing with cannabinoids and understanding your body, and how medical cannabis can help you or not help you, the impact that it has in communicating with community. I think these are things that we need to do just in general to start now. And those organizations have already started the process, because we get calls about it all the time.
Cool.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, this has been such a rich conversation. Hour and a half, and I'm sure we can go on for another hour and a half with the wealth of knowledge that we have with all of our panelists and our guests. But we're going to wrap it up tonight, and there will be more conversations. Again, I want to thank our sponsor, GTI, just for seeing the value in having these types of conversations and making sure that we are continuing to educate minority communities about what's happening in their state. Minority medical marijuana, of course, we're on the ground everywhere you look, pretty much, to make sure that we're represented at the table and our voices are heard, and then so that our communities are understanding what it takes to get into this space and how to move into this space. I want to also highlight all of our guests. Thank you guys. You guys have been amazing. We were supposed to have a guest from the mayor's office tonight. Yeah. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that, but I think we represent well, and I appreciate each of you being here with us and just sharing so much knowledge and information that New Yorkers need to hear and understand if you're thinking about getting into this industry, and even if you're not, because one of the things I learned when I first got into this industry back in 2015, the trip to Colorado, was that everybody was impacted by it. Everybody was impacted by it, whether you were someone who was consuming or not. You had a neighbor, you had a family member, somebody who either worked in the industry, looking to get into the industry or whatnot. So this is absolutely a conversation New Yorkers need to be paying attention to. And we thank you guys again. Thank you, GTI and FP Wellness, for all you guys, support. This is our fourth conversation, and it's been heating up and getting better and better. And New Yorkers, stay alert, stay diligent, stay a part of the process, and always, definitely check out Minority Medical Marijuana on our website, mmunited.org. We could use your support so that we continue to support you and our communities. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and we will see you guys in the future. Take care.
Happy cannabis.